Welcome back to The Explainer. So right now we are unpacking one of the absolute most explosive and consequential crises of 2026, a massive global oil shock. The global energy grid has basically been turned entirely upside down. Today we're going to use the raw data, the geography, and the math to unravel a really fascinating, almost unbelievable engineering paradox that is quietly defining this entire crisis. Let's jump right in.
7 million. Just wrap your head around that number for a second. That is the massive daily barrel capacity of Saudi Arabia's overland oil pipeline, known as the Petroline, which runs from the east all the way to the west. In the midst of this global shock, engineers have managed to push this pipeline to its absolute physical limits, literally moving an ocean of crude oil across the desert every single day. But contrast that with 3 million. That's the effective wartime operational capacity of the port at the exact end of that very same 7 million barrel pipeline. It's an incredible mismatch, right? Think of it like a giant funnel. You can push all the oil you want across the country, but if it has nowhere to go, once it reaches the sea, the whole system just backs up and breaks. Which brings us to Section 1, the Hormuz choke point and the overland bypass strategy.
So to understand how we got here, you have to know that the Strait of Hormuz has essentially been locked down since March 2026. We're talking about a jaw-dropping 94% drop in commercial traffic. Historically, this strait carried about 20 million barrels per day. Its closure completely disrupted roughly a fifth of the global supply, triggering a massive spike in oil prices and creating what the International Energy Agency has literally called the biggest oil shock in history. With the front door effectively slammed shut, Saudi Arabia desperately needed a back door.
That back door is the East-West Petroline. It's a 1,200-kilometer overland route that originates over at the Abqaiq facilities on the Gulf Coast and travels all the way across to the Yanbu port on the Red Sea. King Khaled actually authorized its construction way back in 1979 for exactly this reason, to shield oil exports from Gulf conflicts. It was basically built for exactly the kind of crisis we're seeing right now in 2026.
But the crucial tipping point hit on March 11, 2026. Aramco engineers were in absolute desperation mode, so they urgently maxed out this pipeline to 7 million barrels per day. Now, because there wasn't just some spare pipelines sitting around empty, they had to rapidly convert parallel 48-inch natural gas lines to carry crude oil instead. It was an incredible feat of engineering for sure, but it meant they completely sacrificed their petrochemical supply chain just to keep the crude flowing.
And that leads us to Section 2, the Yanbu port bottleneck.
This is where we see a cascading physical failure. Saudi Arabia has an OPEC Plus production quota of roughly 10.2 million barrels a day. But, as we established, the pipeline can only carry a maximum of 7 million. And when that oil finally makes it to the Yanbu port, the wartime loading capacity is strictly constrained to just 3 to 4 million barrels. The system physically funnels down to an agonizing crawl. The international policy quotas simply do not match the harsh physical reality on the ground.
Let's break down the sheer logistics nightmare at the port itself. First off, domestic refineries scoop up over 1 million barrels a day before a single drop even reaches a ship. Furthermore, Yanbu was engineered for a peacetime volume of just about 1.1 million barrels a day. When they tried to force 4.3 million barrels through it in March, the whole system basically groaned under the weight. Towboats, pilots, berth schedules, everything was pushed way past its limit, resulting in 68% of those massive VLCC supertankers facing severe anchorage delays of over 36 hours. And here's the absolute irony of the whole shebang. There are current multi-billion-dollar preliminary negotiations to expand the pipeline's capacity from 7 million up to 9 million barrels per day. But the port's absolute nominal maximum is just 4.5 million. Expanding the pipeline without expanding the port is literally just pouring more water into a funnel that's already overflowing. It's a multi-billion-dollar plumbing disaster waiting to happen.
All right, let's move on to Section 3, targeted in the crossfire.
Things escalated incredibly fast. I mean, look at the timeline. In March, the Strait of Hormuz closes, and the Petroline hits its max capacity as everyone leans heavily on the Red Sea bypass. But that quote-unquote safe corridor lasted barely a few months. On July 20th, a Houthi maritime embargo effectively turned the Yanbu port exit into an active war zone.
On July 20th, Houthi military spokesman Yahya Saree issued a stark declaration, stating a maritime embargo against the Saudi enemy was effective immediately. What this means in practice is that even if the oil survives the journey across the 1,200-kilometer pipeline, and even if it somehow makes it through the massive delays at the port,
it still has to exit through the highly contested, highly dangerous waters of the Red Sea and the Bab al-Mandeb Strait.
So why is this specific setup so insanely vulnerable? Let's do the math on the geography. Yanbu is about 930 kilometers from Yemen, while Houthi Barkhane 3 missiles have a stated range of 1,200 kilometers. That puts the port well within the danger zone. Plus, remember where the pipeline starts, Abqaiq. That's the very same facility heavily damaged by drone strikes back in 2019. To make matters even worse, Saudi Arabia's PAC-3 Patriot interceptor stocks are reportedly 86% depleted, leaving this entire 1,200-kilometer corridor dangerously exposed.
To put that strategic flaw into perspective, let's look right next door at the United Arab Emirates. They have the ADCOP pipeline. It is only 360 kilometers long, and it exits at Fujairah, right into the safety of the open Indian Ocean, completely bypassing both the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. The Saudi pipeline, by contrast, is over 3 times as long and exits right into a second major maritime choke point.
But honestly, no one in the region is truly untouched. Satellite imagery from March 30th actually caught mysterious fires at 2 key pumping stations along that supposedly safer UAE pipeline. Whether those were accidental or deliberate, it proved to regional security observers that any alternative export route designed to bypass the Strait of Hormuz is highly vulnerable in this current climate.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, the economic reality.
$33.5 billion. That is the Saudi deficit for just the first quarter of 2026. It's literally the largest quarterly deficit in the kingdom's history. And here's the crazy part. This is happening while global oil prices are actually incredibly high due to the conflict. They have the product, and the product is highly valued, but because of these physical bottlenecks, they just can't sell enough of it.
The math here is just sobering. In that very same quarter, Aramco had to pay out a massive $21.89 billion dividend. But look at their free cash flow. It was only $18.60 billion. That leaves a $3.29 billion shortfall. The national oil company is currently being forced to pay out billions more in dividends and government obligations than it is actually generating in cash.
This brings us to a really crucial financial metric, the free cash flow coverage ratio. Right now, it's sitting at 0.85x. For a company of Aramco's massive size, dipping below 1 means they are actively draining their reserves or taking on debt just to meet their payouts. It perfectly illustrates how a physical engineering failure, a pipeline bottleneck, and a congested port is actively bleeding the national treasury dry.
So what we're left with is what analysts are calling the revenue paradox. It's wild. Brent crude is trading sky high, over $96 a barrel. But export volumes are cut in half because of the Yanbu bottleneck. The war is keeping the prices high, but physically preventing them from moving the volume. Ironically, actually, scratch that, tragically, if peace were declared tomorrow, volume would be restored, but the price of oil would likely crash right below their fiscal break-even point. They are completely trapped by their own infrastructure. The East-West Petro line was supposed to be the ultimate insurance policy for global energy. But as we've seen in 2026, pushing a pipeline to its absolute limits means absolutely nothing if the port at the end is too small and the waters beyond it are heavily contested. If this multi-billion-dollar bypass is fundamentally broken, where on earth does the world's oil go next? It's a question that exposes the terrifying fragility of our global energy grid. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this really helped you see why all of this matters. See you next time.